You're about to listen to a podcast full of wonder, excitement, and discovery. It's time for an adventure through Odyssey. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Adventures Through Odyssey podcast, Odyssey Revisited. I'm Will here with John, and we finally have our next episode review, Value in the Process. Now, this is kind of a wonky one on the wiki still, but for the first time, we get to see the Rydell's and Mr. Whitaker interact like a family as Maury and Susu trying to find a healthy path towards making new friends.
I'll say I thought this episode was good. Not great, but good.
Now, you texted me earlier saying you had some problems with it.
Okay. Well, so we have two different storylines. We have the Maury storyline and we have the Suzu storyline. Let's start with the Maury storyline because I think that's objectively the best one.
Yes.
So I think it's a good, here's the thing. There's a lot of different things going on. There's kind of like the teamwork building thing. There's like the friendship thing. And like some of that kind of gets tied up a little bit. Like, I think their whole thing about the process is a little weird. Like, the process includes friendship. Like, I think, like, to me, some of that wording didn't work, but I think the overall message that it's like, this is worth it because you can help others and you can grow connected to people who also care about what you're in and get friends.
Yes.
I liked that. I think it's weird to call it part of the process, which that's basically what this episode's called, but I think the message stuck. And I do think It was fun to see Maury and Mr. Whitaker interact, although I think Mr. Whitaker could have explained what he was doing a little earlier, but I guess Mr. Whitaker was worried that then Maury would feel resentful to get friends. It seemed a little weird.
Yeah, well, Mr. Whitaker is going to Mr. Whitaker. But I was about to say, I could see Whit thinking, well, Maury's a pretty smart kid. He would probably pretend like he made friends just to get me off his back.
Yeah, and that's the thing. So I get that mindset. Although I do like how we saw another like sassy Mr. Whitaker moment where he was like, the more you say this, the more I can't hear you.
That actually was pretty good.
I don't mind because I do feel like it's helpful to give Whit more personality.
Yes, I would agree.
And he's older now, even older from when this started. So I think he's entitled to a little bit of that.
And we get to see some of how he parented. Kind of.
It's true, although isn't his issue didn't he have issues with his parenting?
His kids did, yeah. Well, at least Jenny did.
Jenny did.
Jason just seemed to be upset he was competitive at games, and, well, we don't really know how Jerry felt.
Yeah, the whole thing with Jana?
Jenny. No, her name is Jana. Jenny's the daughter.
You mean the mother?
Jenny's also Jana's daughter.
Oh, yeah. Jenna said there was a whole thing in like one of the early episodes, a member of the family, where she says like after Jerry died, like he kind of really focused on Jason. I think ignored Jana. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so that does make sense. But yeah, I spent this whole episode, the whole Maury subplot, super confused because why is he being so mean to Trey? Isn't he on the team? And then I realized, oh no, that's Cooper.
Oh.
So even then, who knows? But I think this is the first Maury episode not to have Emily in it.
Yeah, and I think it works well. I think his interactions with Trey were interesting, and I do find it a believable come around. Because he is actually teaching, Trey well.
Yes. That is actually one thing I appreciate. Oh.
No, go ahead.
That was one thing I did appreciate. In stories like this, sometimes you can tell they're begrudgingly doing it, but you can tell Maury kind of falls in love with it and sort of realizes it, then just gets mad again because Whit rejects him what he wants.
Yeah.
There might be another reason, because if Eugene's teaching the class, they physically cannot have Maury go to that class. But
Although it'd be an interesting thing. It's weird to me though that Wit's not like something like, why don't you help me with my programming, but you also need to take this basics class.
maybe we'll get to that.
I guess my thing with the process thing about it was it's like it's helpful to start things from the beginning as like part of the process, to do things like it's a little weird. Like I agree like with the friendship angle, but the whole argument that like you should try to do things from the beginning even if you know the things is like kind of weird.
Now, there could have been a good lesson, like maybe Maury's trying to figure something out and he can't figure it out, but during the class he learns it because it's just a basic thing he overlooked.
Yeah. But like instead he basically shows a basic thing to Mr. Whitaker.
Yes.
And I mean, maybe in one draft it was that he had learned that today in class, and it was supposed to be this thing that was helpful. And I like the idea of like, it's more of a thing about like friendship and like teamwork, and he needs to learn that. But it's just weird how they focus on like the idea of the process, because I don't know if they really got that point, but I think the overall point about friendship and teamwork came out.
I
Also,
absolutely
like,
agree.
since when? Maybe I forgot. But like beforehand, I feel like we've had Maury as like a coding genius who's very smart, but now he's basically become Sherlock.
Well, I mean, that makes sense. Moriarty, Emily's greatest foe.
I
But no,
mean,
I
yeah,
did agree. I did find it very weird when he did that whole scene of, well, you do this, and I knew we were gonna come back and have that hit him in the face at the end of the episode the minute it started happening.
yeah.
But
But it was weird. Like it's just like that's like on a different level. I guess he is a master manipulator, so it's not like totally out there. And I didn't hate it. I was just like, I've never seen him act like this, where he's able from little subtle clues like, there's dirt on your shoes or in your fingernails, and like that, I makes him figure this whole thing out.
so that I agree with. It made sense with some of the things in the other episodes, like maybe he wasn't banking on Olivia giving that money. He knew Olivia was going to give the money by asking around.
Yeah, fair.
But that being said, I also cannot imagine a scenario where Trey saying thank you, Maury, on the website throws him for such a loop.
Right. That I agree with that. Now, so unless you have anything else to say, let's move over to the other side, kind of the B plot.
You mean Zoe's villain origin story?
You mean Suzu or Zoe, or it's all.
I'm referring to Zoe. Well, go ahead and say your piece, because I have a thought about this.
Yeah. So I thought at the beginning, I'm like, oh, I like this storyline. Like it's going really well. I think it's interesting how Suzu is like learning to like something that she wouldn't normally like, and it's like a good, nice little subplot. One, also, this new like editor of the Owl is a very interesting character.
Yes. Yes, he
But
is.
like there wasn't a lot to say, but just like, I've made an executive decision. Like it's a little weird, but okay. Then I'm like, oh, it's gonna take an interesting turn with Emily not liking that, and it's gonna go into play into the friendship thing. Instead, Odyssey, for 2 episodes in a row, decides to bring up intellectual property law.
3.
What was the other one?
The coding in the Renee episode.
Oh, yeah, that's true. I forgot about the coding. So, like, you mentioned maybe there's, like, a lawyer. I have to think. I don't know why they reference IP 3 times. Someone has intellectual property on the brain, or as you texted me, maybe they're getting sued for something. Let me say this. In the first, in the Renee coding one, the patent coding thing, it's like, okay. And, like, that's a whole complicated thing with, like, Google v. Oracle. I'm willing to forgive that. Last week, they kind of got trademark copyright a little confused in Legally Wooten. I'm willing to bypass that. I don't know what was going on here. Because first off, I assume when they're talking about, like, Suzu apparently did plagiarize, talks about first that in my country, like, this is all okay. And I'm a little bit like, what country are you talking about? Because, like like I assume they're referring to China. And maybe I'm wrong, and maybe Suzu is Chinese, but isn't her father like their father's an ambassador in Japan?
Yes.
And Japan has pretty standard, if not, I think even a little more strict of copyright law than America. So I don't know why they needed to go on like about a little rant about how like Chinese or like what I presume is that or like other countries' copyright law is not as good, and that it's like the US has stronger copyright law and it's like stealing, because also how they explained it is how US copyright law works. They're like, we can't in America, or she's like, in our country, like ideas are able to be like shared. And it's like, right, that's same in America, that ideas can't be copyrighted. It's the expression of those ideas. And I think the ideas that Suzu act, which is like the idea expression doctrine is like fundamental 101 like copyright law sort of stuff. And I'm just bringing it up because they've talked about IP law for the last 3 episodes, so like it's worth talking about. But I think presumably
Man, I hope
Suzu
Buck gets arrested in the next episode.
presumably Suzu actually like use the exact expression, but it's just funny that they like talk about it as like, well, like we should share ideas, and like Emily's like, well, in America, like that's not how it works. It's like it does work based upon how Suzu said it. That is how it works in America. Like you could have just said she didn't understand plagiarism. Well, one, it's a whole weird thing. It doesn't even work. I guess it's like supposed to be like she didn't follow the process because she did it
It's
wrong.
also the middle school newspaper.
Right. Like, but like it's weird because Zoe's clearly upset about it, not because she thinks it was truly copied. She's like, "Oh, my article's not going to get in the paper. I'm going to run
And,
this through through a plagiarism checker."
okay, so this is what I wanted to get into. So one, I just checked on the wiki. They don't say where Suzu is from, other than that her adoptive father was the ambassador to Japan. So until someone tells me otherwise, I'm assuming she's from Japan.
Yeah. Though I mean, she could be from China, which is fine, but okay, first, then you're either
The only problem with
confusing
China,
just
communism.
well, right. I mean,
There's no way the free expression of ideas.
yeah, it's a little. I guess it's like, but in China, like there's a known, like there's a perception and some reality that like they will sometimes like violate international copyright law, But here's the thing: even if she's adopted from China, it doesn't make sense why you're gonna have a little rant about it in this episode. Second, if not, you're just equating all of Asia to having like the same level of copyright law, which is really bad. Like either way, I'm like either like, why are you bringing this up? This is totally unnecessary to the episode. It's just like saying like, isn't America better? Or you're
Yeah.
totally like construing a bunch of different countries together, and that's like really bad.
Yes. Okay, so this is what I wanted to get into and why I called it Zoe's villain origin story. You are right. Maybe Susu did the wrong thing, but the episode never acknowledges, maybe we're coming back to this in the future, that Zoe did it because she was upset that Susu's article usurped hers.
If it had just been like a protocol thing, like oh, I ran this through and like this is what happened, and then Zoe's like, let's talk to him together and we can explain the situation, get a new article. But it's not like that. It's like, we surprised you by it not being in the paper this week.
Right. Yeah, I would agree with that. And maybe this is the route we're going down, Zoe, because they kind of end walking away hand in hand as friends. And in my head, Zoe kind of did like an evil smirk to the camera at the end of that scene.
Yeah.
So,
well, also like, it doesn't even make sense for Suzu to do that, because I think the implication is that she did it because she didn't like the process. Like she didn't like having to sit there, but they don't like spell that out. Instead, she's like, "Oh, I didn't know that was stealing." Like they absolve her of all her guilt, and instead she's like, "Oh, I feel bad because I've had issues with stealing in the past."
Yeah, so I will say this, and maybe Zoe manipulated that to her advantage. I will give Odyssey the benefit of the doubt that we are coming back to this story at some point.
See, yeah, let me say this. If there's going to be something about, like, Zoe and, like, with, like, a similar attitude thing, then I'm totally, like, fine with that. But it was really weird, especially because it's, like, it wasn't like she was just upset, but she was like, it's almost too good.
Yes. Now, I would agreed. Now, when the episode ended, I thought, oh, if Zoe's whole thing is she's going to manipulate to get ahead, that's kind of a cool idea. But Olivia did the same thing to her during the Faith arc. And
Yeah.
Zoe chewed Olivia out for how wrong that was. Or Zoe knew how wrong that was.
Right, which is why I don't think it's going to come back.
Right, but maybe Zoe joins the team or something and something gets put together, but...
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. What's weird is the Suzu storyline is, like, probably, like, 5. It's no more than a third of the episode length.
Right.
And so I feel like you have a really good Mori storyline, and like one where I was like, I'm feeling Suzu's storyline, because one, they make it seem like she is following the process, which is weird. Like the whole, like,
yes.
It's not like an indication where she's like, oh, I really don't like this, and she's like, oh, I figured out my way to do the process.
I would agree with that. Now, this is one thing, again, I don't want to give the writers some slack. Suzu's character up until this point has been being Mori's sister.
Yeah.
Like, she's always kind of accessory seems like kind of a strong word, but, an accessory to Mori's plot. She's always kind of working for him. So they might have had to figure out how to write her independently. That's probably what part of this episode was about. But yes, I do think this was not a great solo outing for the character.
Well, it's like they wanted her to do this, like, really bad thing, and then they try to justify it by saying, like, well, in my like, the weird, like, where I'm from, that's not, like, wrong, which, I mean, like, presumably I think even if she's from China, she grew up in Japan, and Japan has, I mean, okay, let me say this. I could be totally wrong about Japan's copyright law, but I looked it up. I believe it's part of a treaty that makes pretty universal copyright law based upon what I know about certain companies. Like, let's say, I know it's a video game company, so don't get upset at me, but, like, Nintendo is very strong about intellectual property rights.
Why are Bob and Jesse outside my window?
But, and, like, presumably she grew up in Japan, so presumably that's what her context would be.
I would agree.
So it just doesn't make sense to bring it up. It's almost like they're trying to show, like, well, she didn't mean to do it, when you could have just told me she didn't know about plagiarism, which, like, I kind of roll my eyes at if she's in middle school.
However, she and Mori were homeschooled for a long time, so I'm willing to assume maybe.
Yeah.
But I agree. Look, there might be some cultural Japanese thing we don't know about.
From their description, it gave me like they were trying to throw shade at China for some reason. Which, I mean, like, yeah, I there are complaints about how they handle intellectual property. But also, like, I have no indication, unless it was mentioned briefly in one episode, and I think it's assumed, unless I'm missing a reference in another episode, is that she's from Japan.
I get, to wrap up this storyline, just to make sure we have it. So your biggest problem was with the plagiarism and how it was explained. My biggest problem was it kind of feels like Zoe gets away with doing something super petty.
No, I agree with both. I think both of those were my problems. I just thought it was a weird little diversion where, and I wouldn't be so fixated on it, but someone on the writing staff has brought up intellectual property 3 weeks in a row. And I just want to know why.
I know. Also, before someone in the comments mentions, well, Zoe was doing the right thing, if we're playing that rights, wrongs, and reasons game from that one episode, she did the right thing for the wrong reason.
Right. Also, like, they could have just said, like, it's weird because they could have just had, like, I presume even, like, middle school papers might run things through plagiarism checkers.
Right.
Like, that's a pretty common tool now. And so Zoe could have just done it and, like, carefully approached Suzu about it instead of, like, trying to catch her. Like, your article didn't appear in the paper today.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It is... interesting. Truly, I hope we come back to this in some capacity. Obviously, it's going to be a hot minute because here's
doubt it.
I know. And because there's 2 episodes left in this album. At one point, it was a 2-parter, but it looks now like it's 2 individual episodes. So,
yeah.
And I thought either of them are going to be about Mori and Susu. But I think that wraps it up for this episode. Join us next time for the next album 75. We've got our January news roundup probably out by the time you hear this. If not, it'll be out very shortly, where we discuss the comics and some interesting tidbits they gave us on the most recent episode of the podcast.
Stay tuned.
John's blank stare makes me think he did not listen to the episode of the podcast that's a mailbag.
So, was I supposed to?
I asked you to when we were in Germany.
Oh, well, that was a long time ago, buddy. Just tell me what to say in the mailbag.
Basically, there's only one thing worth talking about, and we'll get to that when we record. All right, so I'm Will.
I'm John.
We'll see you next time.